Hello, and welcome back to the Southern Bible Thumper channel. My name is Cam, and for this upload, we will be reading Exodus chapter 9. We'll go ahead and jump right on in, as usual. Then the Lord said unto Moses, Go in unto Pharaoh, and tell him, Thus saith the Lord God of the Hebrews, Let my people go, that they may serve me. For if thou refuse to let them go, and wilt hold them still, behold, the hand of the Lord is upon thy cattle which is in the field, upon the horses, upon the asses, upon the camels, upon the oxen, and upon the sheep. There shall be a very grievous murrain. And the Lord shall sever between the cattle of Israel and the cattle of Egypt, and there shall nothing die of all that is the children of Israel. And the Lord appointed a set time, saying, Tomorrow the Lord shall do this thing in the land. And the Lord did that thing on the morrow. And all the cattle of Egypt died, but of the cattle of the children of Israel died not one. And Pharaoh sent, and behold, there was not one of the cattle of the Israelites dead. And the heart of Pharaoh was hardened, and he did not let the people go. And the Lord said unto Moses and unto Aaron, Take to you handfuls of ashes to the furnace, and let Moses sprinkle it toward the heaven in the sight of Pharaoh. And it shall become small dust in all the land of Egypt, and shall be a boil breaking forth with blains upon man and upon beast throughout all the land of Egypt. And they took ashes of the furnace, and stood before Pharaoh, and Moses sprinkled it up toward heaven, and it became a boil breaking forth with blains upon man and upon beast. And the magicians could not stand before Moses because of the boils, for the boil was upon the magicians and upon all the Egyptians. And the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, and he hearkened not unto them as the Lord had spoken unto Moses. And the Lord said unto Moses, Rise up early in the morning, and stand before Pharaoh, and say unto him, Thus saith the Lord God of the Hebrews, Let my people go, that they may serve me. For I will at this time send all my plagues upon thine heart, and upon thy servants, and upon thy people, that thou mayest know that there is none like me in all the earth. For now I will stretch out my hand, that I may smite thee and thy people with pestilence, and thou shalt be cut off from the earth. And in very deed for this cause have I raised thee up, for to shew in thee my power, and that my name may be declared throughout all the earth. As yet exhaustest thou thyself against my people, that thou wilt not let them go? Behold, tomorrow about this time I will cause it to rain a very grievous hail, such as hath not been in Egypt since the foundation thereof, even until now. Send therefore now, and gather thy cattle, and all that thou hast in the field, for upon every man and beast which shall be found in the field, and shall not be brought home, the hail shall come down upon them, and they shall die. He that feared the word of the Lord among the servants of Pharaoh made his servants and his cattle flee into the houses. And he that regarded not the word of the Lord left his servants and his cattle in the field. And the Lord said unto Moses, Stretch forth thine hand toward heaven, that there may be hail in all the land of Egypt, upon man, and upon beast, and upon every herb of the field, throughout the land of Egypt. And Moses stretched forth his rod toward heaven, and the Lord sent thunder and hail, and the fire ran along upon the ground, and the Lord rained hail upon the land of Egypt. So there was hail and fire mingled with the hail, very grievous, such as there were none like it in all the land of Egypt since it became a nation. And the hail smote throughout all the land of Egypt, all that was in the field, both man and beast. And the hail smote every herb of the field, and brake every tree of the field. Only in the land of Goshen, where the children of Israel were, was there no hail. And Pharaoh sent and called for Moses and Aaron, and said unto them, I have sinned this time. The Lord is righteous, and I and my people are wicked. Entreat the Lord, for it is enough that there be no more mighty thunderings and hail, and I will let you go, and ye shall stay no longer. And Moses said unto him, As soon as I am gone out of the city, I will spread abroad my hands unto the Lord, and the thunder shall cease, neither shall there be any more hail. Thou mayest know how that the earth is the Lord's. But as for thee and thy servants, I know that ye will not yet fear the Lord God. And the flax and the barley was smitten, for the barley was in the ear, and the flax was bald. But the wheat and the rye were not smitten, for they were not grown up. And Moses went out of the city from Pharaoh and spread abroad his hands upon the Lord. And the thunders and hail ceased, and the rain was not poured upon the earth. And when Pharaoh saw that the rain and the hail and the thunders were ceased, he sinned yet more and hardened his heart, he and his servants. And the heart of Pharaoh was hardened, neither would he let the children of Israel go, as the Lord had spoken by Moses. Summarizing Exodus chapter 9, God tells Moses and Aaron to tell Pharaoh if he refuses to let the Israelites go, his livestock will be plagued, but not the Israelite cattle. It happened, Pharaoh didn't listen. Verse 8, Moses and Aaron God told Moses and Aaron to sprinkle ashes from a furnace toward heaven in front of Pharaoh, which turned into a plague of festering boils. In verse 11, the magicians couldn't stand before Moses because they were plagued by the boils. So I'm guessing they didn't try to replicate that plague. Pharaoh still did not agree to let them go. Verse 13 through 18, God tells Moses and Aaron to warn Pharaoh about life threatening hail if he doesn't let the Israelites go. In verse 20, some of the Egyptian servants even obeyed this command. Verse 23 through 24, severe hail and lightning storm ensued, which killed man, animal, and plant life. In verse 26, only in Goshen the storm did not affect anything. Verse 28, Pharaoh told him he'd let the Israelites go. Just ask God to stop the storm. Moses agrees, but communicates that he knows Pharaoh still does not believe. Verse 31, flax and barley crops were destroyed, but the wheat and rye had not matured enough to be destroyed. Verse 35, again, Pharaoh reneged on the agreement once the plague stopped. Highlights of Exodus chapter 9. There's the same warning pattern of how the events are documented. In chapter 8, verse 1 through 5, God told them, and they did as God commanded. In chapter 8, verse 17, and they did so. In chapter 7, verse 20, and Moses and Aaron did so. And in chapter 9, verse 1 through 6, it just says, a plague will infect the cattle on the next day, and it happened. I initially thought when I first read this that God did not communicate a warning before each plague, but after reading this, I think that was a misinterpretation on my end because if the magicians could not stand before Moses because they were in plague, they had boils, then he was there. But also, if Moses and Aaron they threw dust in front of Pharaoh and it turned into boils, then they had to be where Pharaoh was. So that was a misinterpretation on my end. The only other thing is verse 20. Pharaoh's servants even began to fear the word of the Lord about the hail, and some of them bought their cattle and servants indoors. And those that did not regard the warning did not change their routine. So this also confirms that God's warning in verse 13 was communicated to the Egyptians, even though when we look at like the pattern of in chapter 9 verse 1 through 6 a plague will infect the cattle and it happened, and it didn't specifically say like at like in chapter 8 verse 17 God told them and they did so, God told them and Moses and Aaron did so. But when we look at verse 20, the Egyptians knew. I hope that is clear. The next highlight, God warns the ungodly before destruction, and he is generous and has a lot of grace when he gives warnings. Livestock, boils, and hail. Pharaoh was warned specifically before these before these plagues happened. In verse 8, chapter 8, verse 22, flies, God specifically made sure his people didn't suffer. In chapter 9, verse 4, the plagues of the cattle death would not affect the Israelites. In verse 11, it says boils were upon all Egyptians. There was no specificity that it was not harming the Israelites, but in chapter 8, verse 22, there were no flies in Goshen. Also, at this point, at the end of chapter 9, Pharaoh has been asked to let the Hebrews go. In chapter 5, verse 3, chapter 7, verse 6, chapter 7, verse 20, chapter 8, verse 5, chapter 8, verse 17, chapter 8, verse 24, chapter 9, verse 8, chapter 9, verse 6. Chapter ab- okay, so chapter 8, verse 24 with the flies. After the flies, then there was the boils. That's, you know, 7, and it's chapter 9 somewhere. But also chapter 9, verse 6, the cattle. Chapter 9, verse 22, the hailstorm. So this is 9 separate times that Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh asking, can you let these people have a reprieve for 3 days to serve our God? They weren't even asking to be free from slavery forever. And if we go back to Exodus chapter 1, the reason for this enslavement was not financial. It was not as a form of punishment. It was simply because the Egyptian Pharaoh was threatened by the capacity of the Hebrews because there were so many of them. So he enslaved them. That's the only reason. Sometimes the godly will endure the downside of their choices to hold on to their lifestyle instead of adhering to God's requests. In chapter 8, verse 18, the magicians told Pharaoh the lice was from God, that this is God. Chapter 9, verse 11, magicians could not face Moses because of the boils. In chapter 9, verse 20, Pharaoh's Egyptian workers adhered to God's warning. It doesn't even matter that these plagues are affecting other people, other Egyptians that aren't just Pharaoh. He's so stubborn, so stuck on this. Thank you for watching, and the next upload will be Exodus chapter 10.